Have you noticed that Zack Snyder's movies seem to be backwards?
Yeah, they're bad when they should be really good.
No, I'm not referring to his movies.
No, I understand you. They're extremely boring, dense, and incoherent when they should be super epic.
If you give me a moment to explain...
Yes, I understand you. They take away your will to live and your desire to be a Detective Comics fan instead of giving you a reason to live.
Nipal, go reopen your channel instead of being a nuisance on mine. In 2013, Zack Snyder released the film Man of Steel, one that would serve as the start of the Detective Comics extended universe, the shared universe of Detective Comics superhero movies, which would work in a similar way to what Marvel was doing with the so-called Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, when the movie was released, it left the audience and critics completely divided in terms of opinion. Since this immature version of Kal-El, that is this Superman who was just forming and who even kills his antagonist at the end of his film, was certainly controversial. A few years later, Batman v Superman repeated the story, becoming even more divisive than Man of Steel. Do you want to receive hundreds of hate comments on the internet? Go to a geek forum and write the phrase, "I love the movie Batman v Superman," or "I hate the movie Batman v Superman." They have exactly the same effect. There are many reasons for this, but one of the most important is that Zack Snyder was determined to tell the stories of his superheroes in an order that seemed to be backwards. I mean, he wanted to deconstruct before having something built. To understand what Snyder wanted to do with the Detective Comics universe, we first have to take a look at what Marvel was doing with its universe. At this time, take a look at the Phase 1 movies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If you notice, all of them are origin stories that present us with a classic superhero story. These are movies designed for us to get to know these new characters, the values each one represents, pits them against an antagonist, and finally brings them together in a great movie. At the end of this phase, where we could see all these characters interacting with each other, looking back, I don't find the 2012 Avengers story to be very good. But I think what made it attractive at that time is that you already knew the characters and you could see them interact. It was very fun. This model worked and Marvel continues to use it in the next stages of its universe. Phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe closely followed this same approach. Good origin stories introduced us to new characters from the universe. Somewhat lame sequels that didn't bring anything new, and a movie that felt completely different from the rest. I'm referring to The Winter Soldier, one that challenges the values and principles of Captain America by pitting him against the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement, and Logistics Division organization. In the following years, Marvel kept making classic heroism stories, while occasionally introducing movies like Civil War, where we already saw two factions of superheroes with very valid points of view facing each other. We also have Black Panther, a movie with a great antagonist, which tells us that the main hero of the film and the people he represents are not doing enough to save the world. And we also have Infinity War, a film that ends in a great defeat for the superheroes. So if you notice, the concept here was to go from these light-filled stories of good versus evil to this other type of stories that already talk about conflicting points of view, where the superheroes don't always do the right thing and don't always get along, and that's something very different from what Snyder was trying to do. Man of Steel was an origin story, where we definitely didn't see the classic Superman we knew from the comics, movies, and series that came before anywhere. It was about a Kal-El who is learning to use his powers and who still hasn't quite found his place in the world. We saw him destroy private property, suffer from his powers, and even kill his central antagonist General Zod, even though we all know that Superman doesn't kill. According to Snyder, his intention in this film was to approach the character from a deconstructivist perspective. But what the hell is deconstruction? Deconstruction is a term that talks about dismantling the excessive loyalty we have towards any idea and questioning the concepts that form it. For example, it is commonly thought that Superman is this perfect character who always does the right thing and above all, always knows what is right. However, in Man of Steel we see several points where Kal is confused about his role in the conflict with Zod. Similarly, we usually think that Superman does not kill, but according to Snyder, the idea of this movie was to show us how the battle against Zod made Kal form this rule. The idea behind the movie then was to ask questions that challenged the classic view we had of Superman, so that we as an audience would see little by little, how is this perfect cultural icon that we already know being formed? This approach was different from what we had seen so far on the big screen, as we usually already saw it, with a completely well-formed moral code. That was Snyder's intention. Whether it was well executed or not, let me know your opinion in the comments. The truth is, I still love this movie, but I would love to know what you think. This approach to Superman's character was also applied to Batman in the film Batman v Superman. Like a complete sociopathic and paranoid vigilante, fully convinced that he had to eradicate the Kryptonian threat from Earth. It was a violent Batman who marked the people he caught and who really had very clear that his way of acting bordered on criminal. However, when he had Superman at his mercy in that famous Martha scene, I have a complete video about this Martha scene. So let's not stop here. He realizes he cannot kill Superman, now seeing him as another person. When Kal sacrifices himself to stop Doomsday, Bruce reconsiders his way of acting. He decides not to mark Lex Luthor anymore. And in Zack Snyder's Justice League film, we see him as a changed man, striving to live by the lessons learned from Superman's sacrifice. In this new film, we see him as a completely different character, one who fights to keep the team together and even learns to trust other people, similar to more mature versions of Batman seen in the comics. So through the character of Batman, we see what Snyder had planned for the character of Superman. That is, start with an incomplete version of the character and shape it through several movies. Something that was different from what other superhero movies were doing, where it was made very clear to us the values of each character from the first adventure. And I personally like this approach, but I understand why it generates so many problems. Man of Steel was released when audiences were accustomed to superhero films following a classic format. Simple stories of good versus evil that were fun and family friendly. The audience really wanted to see Superman as this symbol of hope from the first movie, and not much later. And this is a point that does bother me in general from Snyder's universe, that they never fully developed Superman's character. In the cinema version of Batman v Superman, the story prioritized introducing Batman over developing Superman's role in the Justice League. Superman was dead for more than half of the film and only appears in the last scenes, as this super unreachable character who is not impressed. Snyder's plan for the second part of the Justice League was for Superman to be the villain of a dystopian future. That almost ends up with the entire Justice League, as he is under the influence of Darkseid's anti-life equation, according to statements from Snyder himself. His plan was for us to see the iconic Superman not until the third part of the Justice League, leading the world's armies who would unite once again to stop Darkseid's invasion. In fact, Snyder even mentioned that he wanted the Justice League 3 to be a kind of spiritual sequel to Man of Steel, in which we would see Superman in all his heroic splendor. When told, it sounds good, but was never practically implemented. And even if it had been carried out, we're talking about the process from immature Superman to iconic Superman. It was going to take more than 10 years prioritizing other characters like Batman. And it's not like Batman didn't have his problems, as many people found it strange that he built his heroic identity at such a late stage in his career, when he had been fighting crime for years, even having lost one or two.
Robin.
Building before building may initially seem illogical. But it's worth noting that nowadays, when superheroes are everywhere, this is becoming more and more feasible. Superheroes are currently a crucial element of pop culture. Every year we see several movies and series of these characters, and this makes us completely familiar with the way these characters work. So much so that we already have products that make fun of the cliches that are used, and other types of productions that present us with deconstructions of these characters. However, this was not true in 2013 when Man of Steel was released. Snyder's deconstructive approach is not the sole reason his vision is controversial. Another point that doesn't help is that the public doesn't seem to fully want to see superheroes as these mythological figures. I say this because recently director Chloe Zhao said that Man of Steel and Snyder's mythological vision had been big inspirations for her movie Eternals. Unfortunately, her movie also had mixed reactions from critics and the public, even though I believe she does a much better job than Snyder, presenting her character's motivations in a short time. However, the public seems uninterested in viewing superheroes as part of mythology, which is acceptable. We don't know if this will always be true, but we must remember that in comics, superhero stories have been changing over many decades. Starting with simple stories and increasing the degree of complexity through these historic comics that deconstructed the superhero genre. It was something of many years, and each approach has its charm. I suppose all that's left for us is to see what kind of stories they will show us in the future. But the most important thing of all is to say, Warner, give us Man of Steel 2, don't leave yet. If you enjoyed this video, check out these others where I discuss the scene with Martha or the dialogue that gives meaning to Lex Luthor. If you've reached this point, you'll definitely enjoy them. That's all for today. I'm Gio the Geek Monitor, and keep looking beyond the obvious.